Committee, Jason Smith. Before I give my testimony, I just want to reflect on how much it has meant to work with the two of you in particular. Mr. McGovern, you know, you've always had your fingerprints all over making sure that we had SNAP, food stamps, so that we could meet the needs of the most vulnerable people. Basic needs, just eating, nothing high tech, but just, and especially for our children. And I just want to let you know how much I appreciate that in view of our, you know, debating over budgeting. I just want to appreciate how strident and firm you have been with making sure that food doesn't become something we negotiate away. And Mr. Cole, you know exactly how I feel about you. And, uh-oh. I want to get you in trouble, but I do appreciate your long-standing effort to help lift people up and truly lift them out of poverty. You know, we have provisions in this bill that claim to lift people out of poverty, but you truly, in your stewardship in this body, have made sure, as you sat at those tables, that low-wage students who come from low-income backgrounds, whether it's in West Virginia, in rural areas, or in Chicago or Detroit, you know, whether they're, you know, first generation, you know, Mexicans or Native Americans or Black students, that when people have talent, you enable them to not only escape poverty, but to move into the middle class through really helping them. And I just want to take this extraordinary opportunity to thank you all for hearing me today. I'm really happy to be here to represent the Ways and Means Committee. I had a much more narrow interest in the bill, but as in the absence of Mr. Neal, I'm going to take advantage of this time and just talk a little bit about some of the provisions in this bill. The green energy tax incentives, as I pointed out in our field hearing in Georgia the other day, I'm old enough to have been through the various iterations of our energy economy. And I had my very first asthma attack shoveling coal into a furnace. So I am a person who has come to appreciate the evolution of energy, how it's going to help us decarbonize, and how it's going to help us create jobs. We have about 9 million jobs projected to be created just by renewing our energy grid. I have seen recently in a trip with the Congressional Black Caucus Institute, places where they've got charging stations everywhere in California, where they are really bringing low-wage workers up to speed and training them to do these jobs. And this is something that the Ways and Means Committee, the Democrats, are really proud that we were able to create through our green energy tax incentives. The IRA, not only will it create 9 million jobs, but it's going to help domestic manufacturers in the critical domestic supply chain. All of us have suffered, you know, individually and collectively about the breakdown in our supply chain. And the Inflation Reduction Act will enable us to build the capacity to close those gaps. I'll wait until our other testimony to go into specifics in case you may have questions on our energy products. The IRS funding cuts. My colleague mentioned that there would be IRS agents. We've heard tales about how they're going to be gun-toting AR-15 IRS agents at the door, and they're going to bother ordinary citizens. Well, let me say, I just filed my taxes, and the IRS has no problem finding me and collecting my taxes. They know exactly how much I make. I have a W-2 that I fill out. We get 1099s, and they have no problem collecting taxes from us. When we were charged with reviewing the audit program for former President Trump's taxes, what we found is that the IRS really couldn't do it because they didn't have the capacity to audit complex tax returns such as his. Tax returns that included 500 individual companies with which Mr. Trump was associated. And they just simply didn't do it. We have strategically, for whatever reason, reduced the numbers of IRS employees such that I don't think that our IRS agency has had this few employees since the early 1990s. And as our tax laws become more sophisticated, we do need to make sure that when people file their taxes, that they're paying their fair share. Tax cheats cost money. We always talk about not having a spending problem, not having a problem with revenue, always having spending problems, but it's spending when we don't collect the taxes that are due. And there are estimates, conservative estimates, that probably $500 billion to $1 trillion a year are lost in revenues that are owed the United States Treasury and our voluntary tax system, because tax cheats know that we don't have the ability to do it. Not only that, innocent middle-class people find themselves frustrated because IRS agents simply don't answer the phone. Wait times are 30, 40 minutes, maybe never. These IRS agents will help alleviate that as well. And so I think that this is long overdue, and that I would hope that the committee would see that this is a good investment in our economy rather than an expense. We also talked about clawing back some of the COVID relief. I just want to remind you, Mr. Chairman, Mr. Ranking Member, that much of that COVID relief money was promised to providers. And it's also money that we are using in developing more and newer vaccines. That as we continue to see mutations of COVID-19, this has informed us that we should not be flat-footed and wait on the next pandemic before we continue to put money into improving outreach, which I think was flawed when the pandemic caught us. And I think it would be ill-advised for us to claw back that funding and to enact those rescissions. I am very, very, I also want to talk about this. This bill doesn't necessarily talk about making cuts to Social Security, but I can tell you that if we default on our debts, that Social Security will in fact be impacted. We've already heard from the IRS that the receipts to date are not as robust as they had hoped that they would be, which means that on any given day that the bills for Social Security, for example, or Medicare come in, if we don't have the cash flow to pay those bills, we will essentially default a little bit at a time. And so, the notion that our safety net programs like Social Security and Medicare will not be impacted is really absolutely not the case. I want to talk about the work requirements in the Temporary Assistance for Needy Families program. And as we go on, I hope that I have another opportunity to go into detail, but I'll just say this. We ended welfare as we know it. You know, 80% of the people who might be eligible for this program with the financial and non-financial criteria are driven away with the deliberate bureaucracy and program of the program that is really designed not to give you any aid. Here's a program. So literally, the only people who are on this program are typically women of color, many child-only cases with grandmas taking care of the children, and people who have tremendous barriers to working. And the program is designed such that it's impossible, really, to lift yourself out of poverty. In my state, Mr. Cole, which is not expanded Medicaid, for example, if someone were diligent and they found themselves one of these $7.50 an hour jobs, you know, and worked every single day, worked 5 days a week, 40 hours a week, 52 weeks a year, they'd earn $15,080 a year, just enough to make themselves ineligible for Medicaid. So the trapezoid nature of these programs is wonderful. I've heard so many Republicans say that welfare traps you into poverty. Yeah, that's right. This one traps you into poverty. You can't make a dime over the poverty level to qualify for any of these programs. And so what we're basically doing, Mr. Cole, Mr. McDermott, Mr. McDermott, my good friend, Mr. McGovern. I'm just so nervous being here. What we're doing really is financing the low-wage workforce. We, with women of color, young mothers, telling them that if you don't take these jobs where there's no education and training, very narrow sorts of work opportunities, you know, if you try to get education and training, you won't be eligible to receive that. And if you don't go to work on these unreliable shifts, working at a bar, working at a restaurant, we're not going to help you with health care. We're not going to help you with child care. You're not going to get sick days. You're not going to get paid family leave. You're going to work in poverty for the rest of your life. And the program, the government program, is designed to be in cahoots with a business model that relies on impoverishing workers. And that would include women, immigrants, and numbers of other people who find themselves trying to negotiate very hard times. And so I look forward to a robust conversation about this. And with that, I would yield back.
Thank you very much for your comments. Chairman Arrington, you're recognized for your opening testimony.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Mr. McGovern. It's an honor to be here. I want to say I'm especially honored to serve with Brennan Boyle, my ranking member. He's a good man. He's a thoughtful lawmaker. I respect him a great deal. We have different opinions, obviously, but I trust him. That's important. I could say amen to everything you said, and I could say I couldn't disagree more with Mr. McGovern's opening comments, respectfully. I want to walk through this Limit, Save, and Grow Act. This is what I believe a responsible approach to the debt ceiling conversations that are going on. Nobody can look at our balance sheet. Nobody can look at the CBO budget outlook and not shudder at the rapid deterioration of our nation's fiscal health. As chairman of the Budget Committee, I can't stress enough to the American people what a financial mess we are in. You mentioned some of the numbers. All you have to do, if you can put your bifocals on, is see the clock ticking away at my friend Thomas Massey. 31 trillion. 123% gross debt to GDP, the highest level of indebtedness in our nation's history. And it's getting much worse really quickly. CBO, nonpartisan, projections over 10 years, double our annual deficits from $1.5 trillion to $3 trillion. Our interest payments from $0.5 trillion to $1.5 trillion, triple the interest payments in 10 years. We're so in the red